Good evening. Welcome to the 2018 Cobb County Democratic Committee Forum for Gubernatorial and Congressional Candidates. This is the third and final evening of debates that has featured our candidates for County Commission, School Board, State House, and State Senate. We'll go to the same rules. This tonight will be held by the same rules and format as the previous evenings. To go over those very quickly. The forum goals. The purpose of the Cobb County Democratic Committee Forum Series is fourfold. Number one, to provide an opportunity for voters across the county to hear the candidates discuss pertinent issues face to face. Number two, to educate the public about the issues related to each office that are up for election. Number three, to stimulate public interest and participation in the election for every office that's on the ballot. And number four, to provide an opportunity for public engagement in public events for qualified Democratic candidates. The format for this evening's debate will be as follows. The Cobb County Democratic Committee will conduct all forums in an open and transparent manner with equal time for each candidate. The speaking order has been determined prior to this event, and opening statements will be made from my left to my right, with closing statements being made from my right to my left. Time permitting, audience questions may be asked. All statements and responses to questions are timed. The designated timekeeper will be in front of you, and we ask that you pay attention to our timekeeper, Ms. Jacqueline Vedder-Depore. She will have signage that will mark you to help you make your timely and accurate remarks. Answers to all questions will be limited to 1 minute. Candidates will be allowed to make a 30-second rebuttal if statements to the candidate is directly or indirectly referenced to them. In all cases, the moderator can make adjustments and ask follow-up questions as needed. The basic rules for this forum are as follows. Only candidates who have qualified with the Cobb County Democratic Committee or the Democratic Party of Georgia and that will be on the ballot on May 22nd, 2018 primary are eligible to participate in this forum series. By participating, all candidates acknowledge that they currently meet any and all requirements to hold the office in which they are running for. Number three, written invitations to the forum were sent out to all candidates who qualified via electronic email and postal service at least 3 weeks prior to this forum date. And last but not least, no questions have been provided to any candidate prior to this evening's event. So with that said, we're going to start with our first round of candidates, which will be a single candidate, which is candidate Flynn Brody, who is running for U.S. Congressional Office in District 11. The U.S. House of Representatives shares equal responsibility for lawmaking with the U.S. Senate. As conceived by the framemakers of the United States Constitution, the House is to represent the popular will of its members and to when they are duly elected by the people. As per the Constitution, the United States House of Representatives makes and passes federal laws. The House is one of the Congress's two chambers, the other being the Senate, and part of federal government's legislative branch. With this said, we would like to begin with opening statements from the candidate from the 11th Congressional District, Mr. Flynn Brody. Flynn.
Thank you, Michael. Just like Michael said, I'm running for Congress for the 11th Congressional District. For me, this is very personal. I grew up loving this country and I have served this country for over 36 years, 26 years of that in the military to include Operation Iraqi Freedom, 10 years here in Cobb County as either an Assistant Solicitor General, as our Veterans Court Coordinator. I truly believe in the greatness of this country, and as I look at it now, the narrative that I see is a narrative of hate, and we need to get away from that. We're a country of Christians. We're a country that believes in helping each other out. We're a country that believes in moving forward, and we need to change the narrative that we hear and coming out of Washington. Because what we see now is partisan efforts on both sides without any bipartisan agreements, any bipartisan legislation, or anything that would say that we're doing this for the people and not for ourselves. I want to move forward with this nation and make sure that everything that we do, everything that you hear, everything that you see coming out of Washington is all about you. I want to represent my constituents to the point that You're going to be able to pick up the phone, call me. You're going to be able to pick up the email me and tell me what's going on, and we're going to be able to fix it. And if we can't fix it, you'll know why we can't fix it. It's important that we get back to the America that I grew up loving. And that, once again, is America that is all about helping each other. Just a little bit about me. Um, my parents were from Alabama and North Carolina. They met in New York. I was an Army brat, when I joined the Army, I was third generation Army. Like I said, I served in combat in Iraq with Alpha Company 1, 6th Infantry. One of the most telling memories of my time in Iraq was I lost 4 soldiers there. But the sad part is I've lost even more since I've been back home. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running for Congress, is because I want to make sure that if we send our men and women off to war, that we take care of them when they get back. We need to make sure that we have adequate health care for our citizens. We need to make sure that our young men and women, as they're growing up, that they're not afraid, that they can focus on their school and do the things that they need to do so that they can become productive citizens. This country is too great to be in the situation that we're in. And when I look out at you, the audience today, you're a diverse group. And that's what America is. It's a bunch of diverse groups melted together to make one nation. And we need to continue to go forward and do the things that we're supposed to do so that we can be a great nation. The hate needs to stop. The fear needs to go away. The love needs to come back. And I believe I can do that through efforts in Washington, being your voice and being the person that you need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brody. I was clear to hear that you talked about being a veteran of the United States military, and we applaud your service for that. Staying with that thought, recent news has shown us, just as of last couple of days, with Donald Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear pact. Do you agree with that? And from the further on news from that, the Iran nuclear deal, do you believe that was an in or an out for us? And do you think that will lead to higher escalations in the Middle East? And what would you do as a congressman to try to fight that?
We've already seen that it's led to higher escalation. Just yesterday, Israel attacked Iran, all the posts that they have in Syria. So it's already started possibly a Middle East war that I believe that the Iran nuclear pact was discouraging. It was making sure that they did not have the ability to create nuclear weapons. And if we hold down that ability, our other allies in the Middle East have the advantage. And that's why it's so important that when we make treaties as a nation, that we have to fulfill those treaties. In Congress, I would put forth a bill that any type of treaty that needs to be pulled out of has to get the recommendation from Congress that it's okay, because otherwise our president can run rampant and just make agreements and disavow those agreements at his will.
Thank you. Next question. Do you believe that there is a legislative option or means to improving workforce diversity through this country?
I do believe there's a means we can do that. And a lot of that has to do with the controls that we put on people's evaluations. Evaluations that employers use need to be blind, in that they don't have any racial or ethnical ingredients in them. And when we do that and people work and are graded based on who they are and what they do versus their color of the skin or their ethnic background, I think we'll find out that we're all striving for the same goals. And that is to be the best person that we can be to improve our employers' position and improve their businesses.
Thank you, sir. With discussion around businesses, we all know that CEO pay has been rising steadily. Do you believe we should be capping CEO pay relative to the revenue or products, or find some other metric in which to ensure that wages stay within some nominal amount between workers and those in the C-suite?
I think that's going to be a hard thing because this is a free enterprise country. And if people are going to pay them, then they're going to pay them. I think the main thing that we need to do as a congressional body is to make sure that if we're going to offer tax incentives, that those incentives have something to do with wages, health care, employee benefits. The tax reform that was just passed, bringing down the rate from 35 to 21%, I think without any incentives, we see that it's not working because instead of giving higher wages and giving more benefits, they've actually started buying back shares. And I think in the end, if we don't put money in the hands of the people who are going to spend it, we're going to slow the economy down, and it's going to cause everything else a ripple effect.
Thank you. Staying in the same line of questioning, what do you feel is the best indication for economic health? Stock market, unemployment rate, income? What would be your idea?
My idea would be income, because with the stock market, when companies buy their shares back, it causes the share prices to go up. We need income at the lower levels to make sure that everybody has buying power, because the economy goes forward when people buy, when people spend money. And so if we make sure that everybody has living wages and are able to provide for their families and provide for themselves, or have a little extra discretional income, we're going to see the economy go forward because people are going to be spending.
Thank you. We all know that globalization is an undeniable fact of doing business in today's world. Do you believe the U.S. should be pursuing regional trade deals or going after unilateral ones?
I think it's a little of both, um, because our trade partners here regionally, Canada, Mexico, South America, they have different needs, different wants than our global partners. We just need to make sure that the things that we're doing fulfill a need for both sides. We need to make sure that we don't discourage employment on our waters, on our borders. We need to make sure that we're not pushing jobs across the ocean because things are cheaper over there. We just need to make sure that everything that we do is helping American workers continue to make living wages.
Thank you, Mr. Brody. Let me ask you a question that hits a little closer to home. The 11th Congressional District has been within the Republican hands for quite some time. If you became the next congressman, what immediate difference will the people living in the 11th District see with you as a congressman?
First, let's take off the if. When I become the next congressman for the 11th Congressional District. What people will say is that I'm willing to work both sides of the aisles, that my main focus will not be to fulfill Democratic ideas, but to fulfill the constituent ideas that help everyone within our district. Anything that anybody proposes, if it's going to help the people in the 11th Congressional District, I'm going to say yes. If it's not going to help, I'm going to say no, and I'm going to be able to tell the constituents why I said no.
Thank you for that. A lot's been made this past year about Donald Trump's tax reform. Do you think it was successful? Do you think it hit the mark? And what would you do differently if you had an opportunity to be on the Hill fighting for tax reform?
I think I mentioned this before. It didn't hit the mark because the people who were supposed to get this trickle-down effect did not receive it. The one-time $1,000 bonuses did not provide enough income or provide enough advantage for those low-income people to be able to continue to spend to move forward the economy. My idea of tax reform is to provide incentives for our businesses, and if they meet those incentives, then give them the opportunity, give them tax benefits. And those incentives would be higher wages, living wages, depending on the nation, health care for their employees, and even community service items for the community, allowing those businesses to put their money to work for the people who support them.
Thank you. We're going to change gears a little bit and talk about immigration. So should legal immigration policy favor keeping families together, or should it have a preference on bringing in the most educated and talented people into our country?
This is a hard question because when we talk about keeping families together, we're mostly talking about our neighbors from South America, from Mexico and South America, and keeping them together. When we talk about bringing the most educated here, we're talking about Europeans or Canadians, bringing them here to the country to use their services. I really do believe that we need a better way to have immigrants come to the country seeking the American way and providing them a path that will guide them to legal naturalization, legal citizenship, because in that effort, they will come and be tax-paying citizens and welcome themselves into the community.
Thank you. Do you believe as a country we should move closer to a single payer system for healthcare, or should we move into another direction? What would be your plan or idea?
My plan would be a different direction than a single payer. I think the ACA, it can work. It's just a matter of us fine tuning it, allowing some of the restrictions that keep us from being able to negotiate with healthcare, with pharmaceutical companies, making sure that all the states have their own exchanges, providing the competition with the rules of the ACA. We can drive healthcare costs down, but it includes all of us participating, because what we need to make sure that those who have pre-existing conditions can get insurance. Those who are healthy need to buy into the system to help with the rates for those who have pre-existing conditions. The ACA, if we worked on fixing what's wrong with it, it can work and it will be valuable to us.
Thank you. As a member of the United States military, I want to go back and ask a question from years back, but it's important that we get your understanding of this. Do you think it was a good idea to invade Iraq in 2003, and why, or why not?
I remember the day I stepped into Iraq, or actually the day I got orders to go to Iraq, and I said to myself, why are we going? And it was because that the threat was in Afghanistan. And if we would have put forth the effort that we put in Iraq, if we would have put forth that effort in Afghanistan, we would no longer be in Afghanistan. We would have eradicated the insurgents, Al-Qaeda. We would have eradicated all of them to the point that I think our borders would be safer, our nation would be safer. But as a soldier, I did my duty, I saluted the flag, and I carried out my mission.
As a follow-up to that, as a congressman, what would have been your actions in that case, the best we know it now?
When the vote would have been put forth to vote for the Iraq War, I would have voted no. And the reason for that, because at the time, Saddam Hussein was not a threat to our nation. There was no actual evidence of weapons of mass destruction. So the reasons that we sent a lot of young men to die just weren't there.
There's been a recent discussion about cybersecurity. Recently, Mark Zuckerberg was asked to testify in front of Congress. And I'm curious to understand, what is your thought around privacy as it relates to individual citizens and Facebook or other organizations that may use that in ways that wasn't necessarily meant for?
I think that's going to be a hard thing to take control of, because literally, and I'm sure some people in the audience right now are either live streaming or tweeting or putting information about everything that they do every single day, every single hour. That information is there, and it's there for the taking for people to use. It's going to be important that those who sell that information make sure that whoever's information they're selling knows that they're selling in exactly what they are selling. Because none of us want our information out there to be used to manipulate us in any way. And that's what we see. I mean, you can't even have a conversation with someone with your cell phone without some ad popping up that you've already talked about. Not even on the phone, but that you've only talked about. So it's a crisis that we have to worry about. And it's something that it even exists outside the United States, because our enemies are definitely trying to contact with our citizens.
Thank you. I think you made it clear to say it's not a matter of if, it's when
Yes.
you take over as congressman. So I'm curious, what would be the initial thing you would do upon getting to Capitol Hill?
The first thing I want to do is make sure I have offices down here filled with people that are going to help my constituents, to make sure that whatever concern that they have, that when they call, we can fulfill that need. As far as office, one of the things I want to seek is make sure our health care is extended out to every single American, make sure that our Social Security is fixed, make sure that our military is taken care of, especially our veterans that have come home from war. there's a whole list of things that I want to try to do, um, but it's going to take a lot for us to turn over the House, to turn over the Senate, so that those items that we push forward will get through. Um, if Congress continues to be the way it is right now.
Thank you. Do you believe that the United States government should encourage companies such as Tesla with tax incentives in order to push the innovation forward in this country?
Yes, I do believe that. We have to bear the cost of research and development. And by bearing that cost, allowing others to promote our ideas, the reasoning for keeping clean technology, clean energy, those type things, we have to promote those costs by giving tax incentives. Otherwise, it's not going to be worthwhile for them to push forward on those things. It's critical that we as a nation start looking beyond our lifetime and make sure that this country, this nation, this earth is going to be prepared for our prosperity.
Thank you, Mr. Brody. So at this point in time, that concludes the questions we have. I would like for you to go into your closing statement, please.
The one thing I want to happen is to make sure that each and every one of you know that us in Washington are there to fulfill your needs. We are a nation that is governed by the people, not by the government. Your ideas, your thoughts, your wants are what we need to be promoting while we're in Washington. My campaign slogan is Change the Narrative. 2018.com is my campaign website. The slogan is Change the Narrative. And I want to change what comes out of Washington. I want you, when you see your congressman, you know that they're working for you. I want you to know that each and every time they vote, that it's a vote for you. That each and every concern that you have, that they're working there to fix it. That we're moving this nation forward to a place where we can be happy with one another, that we can seek and know each other. I have one little story to tell. As a lawyer, I used to do real estate closings. And at one time, I took my wife with me to go to a closing. And at that closing, we drove up, and this is up in the hills in LJ. We drove up to the house, and there was a big rebel flag standing outside the door. When we walked to the door, there was a sign saying, "The South will rise again." And so I looked at my wife and I said, "I don't know what we done got ourselves into." But when we walked in and started doing the closing, they just happened to be cooking something. And I said, "This smells pretty good." And they said, "Well, you're welcome to have some." But at the time we were fasting as part of our church in the beginning of the year. And so they said, "Well, you know what? We're fasting too." They were also fasting. Well, that little nugget there led to a 2-hour conversation talking about God and the things that we believed in. And more than ever, I realized we have so much more in common than we have different. And that's what we need to go forward and make this country great again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Thank you for stepping up. Thank you for being willing to run for office, and good luck on May 22nd.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll move to our contested U.S. congressional candidates, specifically Congressional District 6. This congressional office is currently held by Karen Handel, and this year we have 4 Democratic candidates that are looking to unseat her. Those candidates are Kevin Abel, who is not here with us today, Stephen Griffin Knight, Bobby Capel, and Lucy McBath. United States Georgia congressional delegation is made up of 14 congressmen, of which 4 are Democrats. Also referred to as congressmen or congresswomen, each representative is elected to a 2-year term serving the people in a specific congressional district. The 6th congressional district is made up of Eastern Cobb County, Northern Fulton County, and the northern portion of DeKalb County. Among other duties, representatives' responsibilities are to introduce bills and resolutions, offer amendments, and serve on committees. Welcome, each of you, to our forum today. We are going to start this off like we did the last segment with a 2 or 3 minute opening statement, and we will start with Mr. Stephen Griffin Knight.
Good evening, everyone. I want to begin by extending my sincere thanks to the Cobb County Democratic Party for having us here this evening. It is a very serious matter that brings us to the table today, so thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. My name is Stephen Knight Griffin, and I am one of the candidates that is running to unseat Karen Handel in November. I'm told as a candidate, one of my greatest challenges is going to be making sure my name gets out there, and name recognition in particular. So I'm going to give you 3 reasons right now to remember who I am. 1, I am the candidate who shows up early and stays late. For me, this is about much more than FaceTime. I actually care about the issues that concern your family, and I want to help you solve them from a federal policy perspective. I'm open, I'm transparent, and I'm accessible. And I want to point out that I give out my personal email address, my personal phone number, because I love interacting with the constituents, and I love interacting with people individually and learning about their stories. That won't change once I'm elected. 2, I am the only candidate with the substance necessary to be an effective legislator from day one. You will never find me needing a script. You'll never find me needing tired platitudes or talking points, because I've actually worked in the policy field. I have experience there. And right now, that matters. The Trump administration is now, and we don't have time for a learning curve. 3rd, I am familiar with the sacrifice that will be necessary to win in November. At 12, I stood up to be the man of my family when my dad was nowhere to be found. At 26, only a few years out of college, I gave up every cent that I had saved as a young man to save my family home from foreclosure when my mom lost her job. And I did that because she was worth it. Most recently, I had to make one of the most difficult decisions of my life, leaving a job that I loved to run for this office at CDC. And I did that because you deserve a choice. You deserve a choice above and beyond career politicians, celebrities, and the wealthy. And you deserve that choice because you matter. Now, for me, this is real life with real risks. I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to live on or self-fund my campaign with. So I need your help, and I need your vote on May 22nd, because together we can take the battle to Karen in November, and together we can send a message to the Trump administration that they will not soon forget. My vow to you is that I've given you 3 reasons to remember my name. I will never forget your name, and I will never forget your story when I go to Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Capel, your open statements, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you for your leadership of the Cobb County Democratic Party. Thank you all for showing up here today. This is an exciting time to be a Democrat, and I never thought I'd be saying that a year and a half ago. The victory in Pennsylvania in the special election from Connor Lamb, the win in Alabama from Doug Jones. The South is open for business for Democrats. And we're going to have a real shot to change things, not only in Washington, but in our representation right here in District 6. A little about me. My name is Bobby Capel, and I am a lifelong Democrat who's only really been able to come out of the closet, so to speak, since I left my job as a news anchor at CBS 46. Was the morning anchor there for several years alongside Amanda Davis. Quit my job in October to run for this seat because I think we can do better. I've got boy-girl twins that were born prematurely at just over 3 pounds each, and they're really the reason I'm doing this. They spent their first 17 days of life in the neonatal intensive care unit at Piedmont Hospital, racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in bills. Now, we were fortunate in the fact that they got better and we had coverage. But I'm running to make sure that everybody has access to the same kind of coverage that my kids got. And that's something Congresswoman Karen Handel does not agree with us on. She doesn't want to cover folks with pre-existing conditions. She wants kids like mine to face lifetime caps simply because they were born early. We should never in this country be forcing folks to choose between bankruptcy and their health. And we're going to have the opportunity in November to do something about that. But this election and our campaign is not just about me and my personal story and my wife and our family. It's about all of us in this district. I have spent my career as a newscaster and as a news reporter telling other people's stories and listening to their stories. It's been incredible just in the 7 months we've been doing this campaign to hear all the people come up to us with their healthcare story. We deserve an America and a government that is representative of the people who live here. I don't know if you've noticed, but Karen Handel hasn't held a town hall meeting since she's been in office with anybody who has not voted for her. We can do so much better, and we're going to in November. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Capel. Ms. Macbeth, please give us your opening statement, ma'am.
Good evening. Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to be here. Thank you to the Cobb Democratic Party for inviting me this evening. My name is Lucy Macbeth. I know that you may not know that much about me, but let me just give you a little bit more information. I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. I was born to two parents that were healthcare providers. My father was a dentist and my mother was a nurse, but also they were civil rights leaders. So I grew up in a house really caring about people's civil and human rights. I have been living in Georgia since 1990. I got married and moved here with Jordan's father. I had been working as a flight attendant for Delta Airlines for 30 years, so I was really entrenched in the community. I worked for Delta Airlines for 30 years. I have also been a two-time breast cancer survivor, so yes, I do understand how you feel, Mr. Capel, about making sure that everyone has access to good health care. And I truly understand what it means to be a single mother. When I was a single mother for that time, trying to figure out how was I going to make it, who was going to take care of my child. In having been that flight attendant for Delta Airlines those years, I retired in December 2014 simply because my son was killed in the National Loud Music case when he was playing music in the car with his friends. And we are the only national case when there is a murder as such, and there's actually justice for as many attempted murders as there were on the three boys that were in the car with my son. We did receive first-degree murder for my child. It took us 2 years to go through that very, very painful experience. So I do understand how important it is to make sure that everyone is kept from unnecessary gun violence. And so that's the work that I've been doing around the nation for the last 5 years. I've been acting as a national gun violence prevention activist and lobbyist. I'm the national spokesperson for Every Town for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, working around the country to keep you safe. But what I've understood around the country is that all of the fears and concerns that you have about living from day to day, those are the same concerns that I know that people around the nation have had. And I want to offer you hope in Washington. These have been my experiences. That's the reality of so many people that live in this district. And I want to represent you to make your life better and give you hope.
Thank you, Ms. Macbeth. My first question deals with part of the roles and responsibilities of a congressperson, which is to serve on committees. If you became the next congressperson for the 6th Congressional District, what single committee would you like to serve on and why? And what do you think you could bring to the table? Ms. Macbeth, we'll start with you.
Oh, most definitely. Probably the Judiciary Committee, but of course because that has a lot to do with gun violence prevention. There's so many moving pieces and parts to gun violence prevention that actually that is better served under very many different kinds of committees. But I've spent a lot of time with that specific committee and their bill markups. I've spent a lot of time watching our legislators, the Democrats, put forth amendment after amendment, watching the Republicans turn it down in prevention, in gun violence prevention. So the Judiciary Committee, I would hope, but as a junior representative, they may not allow me to be on it, but I hope that that would be one of the committees that I would be able to serve upon. But of course, whatever committee I'm assigned to, I promise to do my best to do due diligence to make sure that I'm making the best and most sound decisions that represent the citizens in my district.
Thank you, Ms. Macbeth. Mr. Capel, same question to you, sir.
I think energy and commerce. That is where the bulk of the healthcare policy in this country is written. And I think it's important that if we're going to have people who are working on those issues and are passionate about them and care deeply about them, that they are involved in the process of actually making things better. You know, one of the big issues with this current administration and the current Congress is that they are actively trying to tank the Affordable Care Act. And we're seeing the consequences of that firsthand here as premiums are getting driven up as a result. And I'm sure we'll be getting into a lot of that tonight. But energy and commerce would be where I'd like to be.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin, to you, sir.
Thank you for the question, Michael. So my first choice for committee assignment would be appropriations. And I think it's really important that we have a voice there, because we can talk about things like healthcare reform, about studying gun violence with the CDC, things of that nature. But if we can't actually fund our priorities in Congress, we can't get any of these things done. And I would be a loud and assertive voice in defense of Georgia families, in defense of our shared progressive values, and making sure that not only are our voices heard, but our priorities are funded.
Thank you. So next question does actually deal with healthcare. So what is the single largest challenge to healthcare reform, and what specific area would you push the most? Mr. Capel, we'll start with you.
All right, well, I'll expand on where I was going with that. One of the things we've seen from this president saying he wanted to tank the ACA is the destabilization of the marketplace. And we just saw our former representative, Tom Price, come out, and former HHS secretary, and say just in the past week and a half or so that because they stripped the mandate out of that tax bill, that now that is the reason the premiums are going up 20% this year. It has nothing to do with the Affordable Care Act and everything to do with how the administration and the Congress was handling the Affordable Care Act. To take this a step further, right here in Georgia, we saw insurance companies like Blue Cross and Blue Shield leave several portions of the state of Georgia specifically because they couldn't guarantee that the Affordable Care Act would still be in place by the time that these these calculations were made for years to come. Risk corridors expired in 2016. Those were the bumpers that keep the insurance system on track. If we're going to have the opportunity in this country to pay a decent rate for good health care, we're going to have a Congress that's committed to ensuring that the law on the book is something that can work and not can fail.
Thank you, Mr. Capel. Mr. Griffin, to you, sir.
So I would say at this point in time, the greatest challenge to the Affordable Care Act is the administration. They have shown time and time again that they will do whatever it takes to sabotage the law. And it's our job in Congress as a co-equal branch to demand that end. Now, there are a couple of things that we need to do to stabilize the marketplace above and beyond risk corridors. That's certainly part of the equation. But we need to reinstitute the ideas that we had as part of the original package, things like risk sharing, things like reinsurance, because collectively, these additional principles, coupled with the public option that I advocate, will meaningfully reduce premiums, expand coverage, and make sure people have not only access to health care, which is a Republican talking point, but coverage to get the care that they need. Thank you.
Thank you. And the same question to you, Ms. Macbeth. What do you see as the single largest challenge to healthcare reform, and what would you do specifically about it?
Well, most definitely, we know that the Affordable Care Act does have its challenges. I do not advocate that we destroy it, dismantle it. I absolutely think that what we need to do is fix what's broken. I advocate that we're making sure that we're covering as many people as we possibly can across the country. That is their God-given right to good health care. What I'd like to be able to do is expand Medicare. I'd like to be able to expand, like I said, make sure that as many people can be covered as possible. I would love to be able to expand Medicaid. We have a lot of people in this state that have access to no health insurance. I would love to be able to give people a robust public option. They deserve options. And also like to be able to make sure that like to also make sure that we're are making sure that they have the access to the health care that they need. I would love to be able to do something such as expand our health care centers around the state. In particular, there are a lot of people that don't have access to health care, such as our veterans. Let's give them more options. I think those are viable options that we can have to make sure that everyone has access to what they need for health care.
Thank you, Ms. Macbeth. Next question is to Mr. Griffin. Do you think that the White House should go ahead with its plan to continue offshore drilling? And if not, what plans would you like to put in place to allow us to have more robust energy sources?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. So I would say that I think that the petroleum reserves that we have in this nation are better off underground. I think that we should not be exploiting additional oil resources in this country. That's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at ways to bridge the gap between the ideal future in which renewables make up 100% of our energy grid, but we have other options other than seaborne petroleum, which bears a host of risks above and beyond the simple extraction. So what I would propose to that end is tapping the resources that we do have, for example, natural gas, which is a far cleaner fuel, which has the capacity to meet energy needs and serve as a bridge fuel while we adapt and become more ready from a national perspective to actually move towards a greener grid that consolidates the best strengths of renewable energy while also acknowledging the realities that our energy needs shift from time to time. So I think that it should stay in the ground, Michael.
Thank you. Ms. McBath, the same question to you.
Well, I don't believe in offshore drilling. I hope that Governor Deal would have the courage to tell President Trump that, keep your hands off of our pristine shores. Most definitely, I don't agree with that at all. But I think, once again, we always have to be looking for ways to what do I want to say? Clean and green environment, renewable energy solutions. Those are things that we have to continue to spend our resources on. The fact that we're giving so much money to our multinational corporations, giving these huge giveaways to the rich, that money should be allocated towards having a cleaner environment. And those are some of the things that I think in Washington I know that I will be willing to work towards, because I know it's a matter of a better quality of life for all of the citizens here in Georgia.
Thank you, Ms. McBath. And Mr. Capel, same question to you, sir.
I think one of the things that this president has failed, one of the many things that he's failed in doing, is being a good steward of our environment. From dumping coal into our rivers to, if you're talking about oil for a second here, think about this. When President Obama left office, he had put into place emission standards for cars that every new car made would have to be a 50 mile per gallon car as far as gas. And what does this president do, right, when he comes in? He thought, oh, what a great idea to gut that and make that no longer part of the standard. That just makes no economic sense. It makes no environmental sense. And it's just in keeping with what this president seems to do on a consistent basis when it comes to our environment. He's always putting big business in front of the interests of the American people.
Thank you. And Mr. Griffin, sorry. So to follow up with that really quick, because I think there's no doubt amongst Democrats that we do believe in science, and climate change is in part and due to man-made interferences. So really quickly, what do you see as the most viable renewable energy source and why?
I think all of them in their own way are viable, and all of them will actually be part of the larger solution. When you look at the various ways that renewable energy is produced, for example, solar, wind, tidal energy, things of those nature, obviously the circumstances in which they are able to produce energy changes. For example, the sun isn't shining 24 hours a day, the wind isn't blowing 24 hours a day. So within the context of our renewable future, we need to make sure that we keep the boundaries quite large, that we not sign off on any potential renewable energy source. And to supplement that, we also need to be able to account for energy during the evening when solar production is lower, for example. And Tesla's made some great strides in developing battery storage, which is the missing link, in addition to smart metering, that will provide the bridge to a truly and endlessly renewable future from an energy perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Capel.
To me, this is an all hands on deck approach. Why would we leave anything off the table? In certain corridors of the state and the country, wind is the aspect that is going to generate the most energy. In other places, it's sunshine. In others, it's water, et cetera. But we need to be taking a good hard look at where we can expand and encourage the growth of green businesses, not only here in Georgia, but across the country. It makes, again, economic sense, and it makes environmental sense.
Thank you. Ms. McBath, the same question.
And I would agree that all sources of renewable energy are vitally important. There again, depending on where you are in the country, there might be a more viable source. I think that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are clean and green. It's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are protecting our environment for our quality of life. We have a very big problem with climate change. We have a very big problem here that has to be addressed. And so I think that each and every way that we can possibly use renewable energy, that is to the advantage for the American people. And I think it's just common sense.
Thank you. Next several questions have to do with immigration. And the first question is, do you think it's fair to trade the border wall or enhance security to either protect our dreamers or give them a path towards citizenship? Mr. Capel.
Well, I think one of the things that's going to happen here, excuse me, if the Democrats take back the House in November, is we're going to be coming from a position of strength. And so this nonsense about signing away DACA with the stroke of a pen and leaving all of these kids who have known no place other than the United States in limbo and threatening to send them home to a country that they've never known before is something we are going to be able to make permanent in the Congress. Now, as far as the border wall goes, that just does not make not only sense when it comes to money, when it comes to actual security. If we're trying to secure the border, it has been proven that people have these things called ladders, and they can get right over it. And it just doesn't make any sense to be doing a border wall. And I think this goes to the heart of the Trump presidency, which is that he makes his campaign promises and his decisions not based on folks who have studied the issues, but rather what he hears at chance at his campaign rallies. And we can do a lot better than that.
Thank you. I think it's clear that Mexico will not be paying for a wall. So we make that understood very clearly. So with that said, though, what if we're in a situation to where you were a congressman and had to negotiate? What would be the thing, or what would be anything that you would be willing to negotiate in order to protect our 800,000 plus DACA recipients? Ms. McBath.
Most definitely, as a woman who understands what it's like to have her family torn apart, I don't agree at all with a border wall. And I think that, we ought to offer citizens a way to become American citizens. I think that they ought to have a way to become Americans. We ought to offer them the ability to do so. I do support a Clean Dream Act. I do not support tearing children away from their families. And I think that in Washington, it's incumbent upon anyone that cares about a person's civil and human rights to work very candidly on comprehensive immigration reform. And I intend to do that in Washington.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin.
Let me be blunt. A border wall is a medieval solution to a 21st century problem, and I'm unwilling to make the Faustian bargain with this administration required for that wall to come to fruition. So what I would propose to that end is the bipartisan bill that's already been basically, it's gone through the motions. We already know that we have sufficient support to pass it. We just have a recalcitrant administration that refuses to consider things from a logical and common sense perspective. With additional people in Congress in November, which I suspect we will become from a much stronger position as far as bargaining goes. And I suspect that the willingness of the Republican Party to act in a bipartisan manner will reemerge once they have been put into a position where they actually have to talk with the other party again. And I suspect that we will see some great movement on immigration, including providing a pathway to citizenship for DACA enrollees, as well as a one-time amnesty for undocumented immigrants already here. Thank you.
Thank you. My last question along that line is kind of combines immigration with foreign trade. So has NAFTA done more to help or hurt the U.S. economy? And how would you like to see that negotiation of those trade agreements go into the future, Mr. Griffin?
So I think when you look at this from a free trade perspective and just from a basic economics perspective, the United States is able to do some things better than other countries, and other countries are able to do better some things than the United States. Free trade serves everyone in that way. Now, unfortunately, many of the benefits of free trade have not accrued to the people in this country. We've seen this time and time again where the government has allowed jobs to be outsourced. They have allowed H-1B visas to become basically the trading implement for outsourcing companies and for tech companies to avoid paying decent wages to Americans who are able to do the job, and that must end. So to that end, what I would call for is, while recognizing and acknowledging the massive benefits that free trade delivers, I would call for actually re-examining some of the fundamental elements that we have allowed corporations and multinationals to exploit our workers, because we really need to make sure that the industrial base in America remains cohesive. We need to make sure that people have options as far as their job, and they need to make sure that wages track productivity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Capel, the same question.
I think lawmakers should always be open to anything that enables a better deal for the American worker. But with that said, I am a little terrified to think of this president negotiating any sort of international deal, as we're seeing right now in the Middle East, as we saw in the Paris Climate Agreement with his withdrawal. I just don't put stock in him. I don't trust him. I don't trust him to do the right thing. And like I said, I think it's important that every lawmaker is always open to ensuring that there are more opportunities for Americans. But at the same time, we have got to remember we live in a global world, and we're not the only ones here.
Thank you, Mr. Capel. Ms. McBeth, the same question.
Well, I believe that,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I believe that trade should be free and fair. I think that most Georgians are pretty happy with our exports. I don't believe in tariffs. I think that they lead to trade wars. And also, I think that definitely hurts the American economy. It hurts middle-class citizens as their prices continue to go up. I think the United States always needs to be involved in international trade negotiations. I think it's very important for us to always have a seat at the table. I think not to do so really kind of dampens the confidence that our international trade partners have in the United States. So I always believe that with NAFTA, those kinds of trade agreements, they have been very beneficial to the United States, Mexico, and Canada.
Thank you. Next question deals with diversity. Very simply put, what would you do on Capitol Hill to try to ensure that the legislative body as a whole becomes more diverse? Ms. McBath, the question's to you.
Thank you for that question. Well, definitely, I would think that we would try to make sure that we are instituting policies that offer diversity and inclusion to every individual. I think working with organizations that do that very thing, I know that there's a lot of lobbying in Washington for those very kinds of policies. I think that we have to be very diligent as legislators to be mindful of any bills or initiatives that are put in front of us, even to create those bills and initiatives to make sure that everyone has a fair chance, that we are diverse and inclusive. This is the nation that we live in, and we need to make sure that everyone that represents us in Washington looks like the nation.
Thank you. Mr. Capel, the same question, sir.
And I'm going to take this and move it beyond the Congress for a second, because I think it's a great thing that we have a more diverse Congress. I think we need to be ensuring that everybody has an opportunity in this country, no matter what family they're born to, no matter what color their skin, and no matter what their religion is. And that, to me, is about investing in public education from a young age and ensuring that everybody has a fair shot. It's also about criminal justice reform, where we are seeing a whole generation of people institutionalized that should not have been, in my opinion. And then when they spend time in jail, people are surprised when they become criminals. Well, I think that is a good place to start. And it's a discussion that doesn't seem to be had very often from members of this current Congress. And I would like to see a Congress take a good hard look at that. And the privatizations of prisons, people are doing this for profit now. That's not right.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin, same question.
I believe the question was about what we could do within Congress to make Congress more diverse. And I will point out that I am a gay man, but that is not the reason you should elect me. There are other things that we really need to discuss, kitchen table issues that affect average Americans. Now, to get to the question, I think it's really important that we remember Congress is not just people like us sitting up here running for office. It's also the staffers, the aides, people who keep the wheels of this government running. And one of the best things that we can do to encourage that diversity is get broad sects of society involved in the mechanisms of our government, because it's true. When you pull upon diversity in that way, when you pull upon different experiences in that way, we create the environment for just an expansion of what is possible within government and what is possible outside of government. And I've seen it in both ways. I've worked both within government and outside of it. And consistently what I've seen is when you get people from different walks of life involved in these things, the outcomes are better. People walk away with better understandings, not only of themselves, but of their neighbors. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as congressmen to make sure that we actually do promote diversity, not only amongst ourselves, but within our offices.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Next question is one that's quite simple in nature. We have a unique president, to say the least. If there is one power, action, or thing that he does that you could, at snap of a finger, remove and stop him from doing immediately, what would you do, Mr. Griffin?
So I would do something that Congress can actually do. Actually, the Constitution delegates the Congress with war-making powers, and I don't trust the president with the war-making powers that he has been given by Congress under the blanket military fourth authorization that he has. So if I could snap my fingers and make it happen, that would be the very first thing that I would do, was remove that war powers, because I don't trust him to approach international relations with the stability and with the balance that we need, not only to protect our own safety, but those of our friends, our neighbors, and our allies. And I think that we really need to, as a co-equal branch of government, emphasize not only holding him accountable, but also reining in the worst of his excesses. And his unpredictability, some could argue that that might be beneficial from a geopolitical standpoint. I don't buy it. I think that we really need to rein in the worst of his practices, and we need to do so immediately.
Thank you. Mr. Capel.
If I could snap my fingers, I'd flip the House right now, because that would be the biggest thing we could do to keep him in check on not just the powers of war, but every issue. And hopefully we're going to have that opportunity here.
Thank you. Ms. McBath, snap your finger and let me know what happens.
One, the tweeting. Understanding there's no clear foreign policy agenda. There's no clear agenda for anything coming out of the White House. And I think it's very unfair to the American public to find out from day to day, flip-flop, today it's this, tomorrow it's that. It's very tiring and it's unfair to the American public. Democrats and Republicans alike are simply tired of the tweeting. Also the executive orders. I think that President Trump continues to fill out these executive orders because he doesn't really understand the policy behind it, and he doesn't understand the foundation on which this democracy is founded, and that's the reason why he finds the easy way out of always continuing to create executive orders for his platform agenda.
Thank you. Staying with Donald Trump, it was recently said that it may be best for him not to be impeached and removed that way but yet to be removed from the people through election as somewhat of a mandate. What do you think about that? Do you think he's conducted impeachable offenses? Would you support an impeachment of the president? Mr. Griffin, you first.
So earlier in the month or last month, I attended a town hall meeting with Tom Steyer that talked about this very topic, discussing the prospect of impeachment. And I want to point out that Robert Mueller's investigation is not yet complete. So I would say that while Trump has exhibited some troubling tendencies, I think that we need to wait on the evidence that the special counsel hopefully will be able to produce, or at least set the issue straight and put it to bed over the long term. And I think that elections are our way for holding officials accountable. Now, if we're dissatisfied with the way that he's moving things, the way that the direction is going in this country, we actually can use those very electoral processes to remove that power from him. For example, by flipping the House in November. That is one of the clearest ways that doesn't put Pence in power. It's one of the clearest ways to send a message, and it's one of the clearest ways to demand that he treat the people with the equanimity that we deserve, that he treat the people with what we expect, and that he rein in the worst of his impulses. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Capel, same question.
As Stephen pointed out, I wanted to call him FBI director, but he's no longer FBI director. Robert Mueller's investigation has yet to be concluded, and I think we owe it to not only the voters here in the district, but to everybody in this country who voted for anybody, whether it was Hillary Clinton or President Trump, to get the full facts on the table. And I don't think it's ever a wise decision to make a sweeping decision without all of the relevant facts. And at this point, I, like many in the Congress currently, would want to wait and see Robert Mueller's investigation and then be able to make a judgment.
Thank you. And Ms. Macbeth, same question.
Well, impeachment is a very, very serious process. It takes some time. And of course, we never want to really consider impeaching any president. I would hope that we would want to be able to go through the election process. But what I will say is that in Washington, when I'm in Washington and I have better access to the resources and information to make a more sound, wise decision, if I'm brought to making that decision, I will at that time. But what I think it would be more incumbent upon me to do is spend a lot more of my time and interest in making sure that my citizens have what they need and want, spending my time focusing on your needs. And at that time, if a decision has to be made, then I'll make that decision. But I don't think anyone in this country wants to really impeach a president. But if it comes necessary, then those discussions will have to be made.
Thank you, Ms. Macbeth. The president has made quite a name for himself in discussing issues around what can be seen as protectionism or nationalism. What is your thought about balancing nationalism with globalism and understanding the fact that, I think as Mr. Capel said, we do function in a global society today, but at the same time, there is some truth to the fact that we need strong American factories and workers and government. So, Ms. Macbeth, you please could start balancing between what Trump has considered nationalism versus the ability to be able to ensure that we are staying strong at home.
Well, definitely, of course, you want a good sense of nationalism because it's the pride of the American people, but also to recognize that we always have to be involved and engaged with our international partners, with our alliances, and not to do so, I think, is to our detriment. Our trade agreements are extremely important to us. Climate change is extremely important to us. I'm very, very upset about the fact that we've been extracted from the Paris Climate Agreement. I think those are the kinds of things that we have to remain globally enacted and engaged in with other of our international partners. So a sense of nationalism is very, very important. However, we cannot become what do I want to say, completely isolated, which I think that's the direction that we're going in the nation. We have a lot of alliances around the country. We need to continue to have those alliances diplomatically, for intelligence, and also just for making sure that we have impact around the nation. We've been the strongest democracy in the world. In order to be able to do that, continue to do that, we still have to be a part of a global world.
Thank you. And Mr. Griffin, same question.
So thank you for the question, Michael. I think you're being kind by describing his approach as nationalism. I would more appropriately categorize it as jingoism. And I don't think that that's healthy or really sane from the perspective of where we're coming from in the world. The United States has a duty to itself, to its people, to provide the leadership necessary to lead us into the 21st century successfully. And by abdicating that leadership, I think he makes us both less safe and less free, here and abroad. Now, one of the best ways that we can promote peace here and abroad is by engaging in trade. And we need to make sure that that trade ultimately engenders a benefit or accrues a benefit to the American people. And we can do that without engaging in protectionist measures. What we can do is actually negotiate with our friends and allies. But the way the current administration is going, we're not going to have very many friends and allies left if we continue to conduct ourselves in this way. We can look at the Iran agreement as an example of that. That is us breaking our word. And if we continue to do things like that, how can we expect anyone to be willing to deal with us, even on a trade relation basis? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Capel.
Everyone in this room is a patriot. We all love this country, or we wouldn't be here today listening to us blabber on about how we think we can do better than the current administration. And the fact is, we can conduct and love our country, but still conduct ourselves with some respect and some decency, not only here in this country, but around the world. I am tired of seeing this administration stir up some of the worst instincts in this country. The race baiting, it's not healthy for a democracy. And when we talk to each other with respect and decency, it gives us a lot better chance to fix some of the issues that we all want to make better. Now, just briefly, around the world, we talk about this vacuum of leadership with the United States right now under this current administration, and we're seeing the consequences of that in the Middle East with people like China and also with Russia stepping into that vacuum to fill it and grabbing more power in places like Syria and around the world. I think that's one of the issues with his foreign policy as well.
Thank you. Last question around foreign policy, as you mentioned, is would you support a preemptive strike on North Korea, Iran, or any other country in an attempt to deter its nuclear capabilities? Mr. Griffin.
I think that's a very difficult question to approach from what we know outside of being actually elected officials. There
So
are
what,
certain.
what measures would you look at? What key things would you, as a congressman, look to see through intelligence to determine if and when it was appropriate time to do so?
Absolutely. So I think one of the best things to look at is whether there's an actual and proven and credible threat to people here, our allies abroad, basically geopolitical stability. Now, I'm not one of those people that thinks that we should proactively engage in military strikes unless it's absolutely called for. So what I would look for would be an impending threat. In other words, a decision has been made, it is going to happen, we need to react to it. I think that when we're dealing with potentially nuclear capable states, we have a very difficult decision ahead of us, because if we engage with these states, we create the potential for them to strike back at us, not just conventionally, but with nuclear weapons as well. And we need to realize that while Trump is while he's unpredictable, we can't really understand the mind of these foreign leaders either. And that's not to say that we should back down in the face of aggression, certainly not. We should be assertive and we should be clear about where we stand, but we also need to be balanced. And the current administration giving them carte blanche to proactively strike, I think, is a recipe for disaster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Mr. Capel, same question to you, sir.
That is like the hypothetical to end all hypotheticals. I don't think we can sit here today and give you a real honest answer on that, because that is literally a case where you're putting people's lives at risk, not only of our soldiers, but wherever you're sending those rockets to. And I would never feel comfortable making that decision without a full basis of facts and knowing what the consequences would be either way. And without that information, I couldn't tell you.
Thank you. Ms. Macbeth, same question.
Well, I think it relies upon a healthy balance of information and intelligence from not only our CIA, but also from our alliances around the country that we work with militarily and diplomatically. I think that's been one of the issues with President Trump. He seems to be making these decisions with no interaction and not working with Congress, which is definitely a detriment. And as the gentleman have said earlier, there may not even be credible threats. So I think it's not only just a reliance upon our own CIA and our own intel, but relying upon the help and the assistance of all of our alliances to make those sound decisions without making these strikes unnecessarily and causing loss of life and destruction.
Thank you for that. Thank you all for that question. Understand that it's definitely hypothetical, but one that we are increasingly facing in today's world. In addition to that, not only is it in the physical aspect, but also in cyberspace and other areas where we're seeing this. As it relates to that, what would you do specifically as a congressperson to counteract future incidences of Russia's meddling in not only our election system, but in our critical infrastructure in all areas? Ms. Macbeth, I'll go to you first.
Well, most definitely, I think the first thing I would do is allow Special Counsel Mueller to continue with his investigation. I think there's a lot of information yet that's to come out in that investigation. Of course, we have to continue to have the CIA and all of our operatives be allowed to do that investigation, finding as much information from our resources as possible. It's imperative that we do so.
Thank you. Mr. Capel.
I think we got to start by acknowledging the fact that they're doing it. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that some members of the Congress, the president, whatever, but the fact that some members of Congress who have been elected independent of the president are pretending that Russia did not attempt to interfere in our 2016 presidential election, that they're not going to attempt to interfere in this election or any election forward, is absurd. And again, I hate to sound like I'm repeating myself, but yet another issue with this Congress and this president is they don't deal in reality. And it's impossible to fix issues when you're not acknowledging the problems.
Thank you for that. Mr. Griffin.
So within the context of the question, last I heard, a paper ballot has never been hacked. So one of the very first things that I would propose to deal with Russian meddling in our elections is removing the capability for them to do so at all from a voting perspective. Now, obviously, that won't counteract their ability to intervene via social media. That's something that we'll need to address separately. But we have right here in Georgia, Georgia's very own 6th district, Diebold voting machines that use an ancient version of Windows which hasn't been updated in years. And if we're looking at cybersecurity as a holistic issue, in addition to being part and parcel of the electoral cornerstone that makes up our democracy, we need to have systems that are resilient, if not immune, to this kind of intervention. So that would be a place I start. And obviously, we need to engage in this on a much higher level. I'd love to see this kind of thing actually come about and be discussed on a much more holistic level, because addressing this just from one perspective is not going to solve the problem. We need to fundamentally rethink how we approach things from a cybersecurity perspective, and that's got to start with us.
Thank you. Next question is, do you think it's better for the United States to have an economy that's focused on the creation of goods or one that focuses more on services? Mr. Griffin.
So I think a healthy economy is going to focus on both things. Right now, we have a predominantly service-oriented economy. Historically, we've been industrially based. And I think the future is going to fall somewhere in between. But when we talk about what our future economic base is going to look like, we need to bear things in mind like automation. So even though we might see parts of the industrial base return to the United States, given our increasingly large advances as far as technology and AI, that doesn't mean it will accrue benefits to the workforce that exists right now. So in any event, regardless of how we ultimately try to spin the economy, we need to make sure that it works for everyone. And there's a couple of different ways that we can do that, but we need to start first and foremost by examining the ways that our economy works for people right now and the ways that it doesn't. Because in the absence of this understanding, we will never be able to confront the challenges of the 21st century as they pertain to the economy. And we will never be able to actually serve our people in a way that will not only promote productivity as well as economic activity, but also promote their well-being and increase their wages. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Capel.
I agree that it has to be both. One of the problems with Congress in general, and has been like this for decades, is that they're very reactive instead of proactive. It seems like we're always responding to yesterday's problems and trying to clean up yesterday's mess, when we really should be focused on tomorrow's potential problems. You touched on automation. I'm going to play this out for a second. If we have cars that drive themselves, which we very well may in the future, in the near future, we could have trucks that drive themselves, which means those semi-trucks and all those drivers that drive those semi-trucks across the country on a daily basis lose their job. How about all of the hotels and motels along the roadway that those folks rely on, and the service stations as well, and the jobs that those create? I mean, that's a lot of jobs when you add that all up. That's just one tiny sector of it. But we need to be taking a forward-looking, forward-thinking approach to tackle not only the issues of the economy, but every sector of this country and every corner of this country.
Thank you. Ms. Macbeth, same question.
I think also a combination of both services and goods, anything that's going to be able to stir the economy, whether that is entrepreneurs that are providing services to communities that they live in, or also providing goods. Anything that's going to continue to stir the economy is beneficial for all people. There again, as the gentleman have said, there's not one way to do that. And I just think that that's the most efficient way, expedient way to make sure that our productivity continues to grow, that people can continue to thrive, people have the ability to live a better quality life, and that's a combination of both.
Thank you. I know within the 6th Congressional District, there are many small businesses. However, large companies continue to encroach on that and steal away customers and shares. What would you do as Congressman to ensure that small businesses still have viability within the 6th District? Mr. Griffin.
I think there are a couple of ways that you can approach the plight of small businesses. We need to understand that first and foremost, healthcare premiums are a very real concern for a lot of small businesses. And a lot of the people that I've spoken to who run small businesses have to contend with that kind of thing, whether they're operating out of the exchange or whether they're purchasing private coverage via other options. So that's a great place for us to start. Another area is the tax code. And even though the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act ostensibly helps small businesses, it doesn't help all of them, and it doesn't help them uniformly. So we need to make sure that the tax code is arranged in such a way that it encourages entrepreneurship, it encourages people to go into business for themselves, and it facilitates their ability to do so. Lastly, we need to look at low or no interest loans for people who are willing to go out on a limb and try to establish businesses. We already have this in some form or fashion with the Small Business Administration, but it needs to be dramatically expanded. And we need to make sure that people know that these programs exist, they know how to access them, and that generally speaking, that these benefits are available to people because they enrich our lives, they enrich our communities, and they make us more economically powerful as well.
Thank you. Mr. Capel, how would you go about protecting small businesses within the 6th District?
Well, small businesses are the lifeblood of the American economy and have been since our inception as a country. Now, what's happened a lot in the last 50 years or so is a lot of these big corporations have kind of swallowed up some of the space that those small businesses had occupied. But we need to do a few things right now that encourage small business, and that includes tax credits for small businesses specifically. Stephen touched on healthcare. It is one of the biggest issues. If we have a strong marketplace with the Affordable Care Act, then we're going to have an opportunity for more people to be willing to go out and strike it out on their own without fear that if they get diagnosed with something while they leave their cushy job in order to start a small business, that they're not going to be covered and have to be bankrupt. I think those are the two key drivers in small businesses in keeping our local economy healthy and encouraging that growth. I mean, we want people to take chances and be entrepreneurs and go start up that business that they wanted to start up and encourage the growth in the community.
Thank you for that. Ms. McBeth, same question.
I would also say tax relief for small businesses. Heavens knows that they are the backbone of the 6th District and, of course, of the United States of America. Also making sure that the small businesses have the ability to offer health care to their employees. We know that's an economic issue when employees don't have access to good health care that sometimes is not provided by their employers, that UPen's the ability for them to be able to come to work. Of course, that is passed on not only to the family's economic viability. They're not viable if they're not able to work because they have health care challenges. That gets passed on to the community and to the nation at large. So most definitely tax relief, as well as making sure that these small businesses can provide health care for the employees that they employ.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to keep it within the 6th Congressional District because the likelihood is that one of you could be our next congressperson. So the question is, what would be the most immediate, concrete thing that we would see as having a Democrat, particularly one of you, as the next congressperson in the 6th? What would the 6th Congressional District, people of the 6th Congressional District, see as their immediate benefit to having you in office? Mr. Capel.
Cementing the protections of the Affordable Care Act so everybody knows it's going to be around for the rest of this country's life. And we will fix any issues that we see coming forward, but ensuring that the folks who deserve and need coverage under the Affordable Care Act get it and don't have to worry about tomorrow, and that we can stabilize the marketplace and ensure that premiums don't continue to skyrocket at the rate that they're at right now.
Thank you. Ms. McBeth.
Most definitely an open door policy. As your representative in Washington, it's incumbent upon your legislator to be accountable to you with an open door policy. Most definitely, I want to make sure that you are safe. I don't want you living in fear from gun violence and having to suffer the way that my family has suffered too. I want to make sure that you have access to really good health care. That is your civil and human right. And 3, I would like to make sure that we are raising the minimum wage to give you a livable wage. No one in this district can live on $7.25 an hour. You deserve a good quality of life, and I want to make sure that you have that through an open door policy being held accountable to you.
Thank you, Ms. McBeth. And Mr. Griffin.
What my opponents have described are both acts that would require essentially a supermajority in Congress. And right now, we don't look poised to take the Senate quite as commandingly as we do the House. So realistically, the very first thing that I could offer the people of this district is something that we currently lack: true representation, accessibility, accountability, and transparency. And I've already done a lot to my, to basically be the change that I want to see in that regard. It's like I said earlier, I have provided people with my personal phone number, with my personal email address, because I actually like to discuss these issues. I want to know your story. I want to know what your family is dealing with and see how I can help. And I think that those conversations are the basis for how we change the much larger legislative problems that we have in this country, is making sure that we understand our neighbors, that we understand their challenges, and then going forth, bringing those challenges with us to Washington, putting the human face on the legislation that we're fighting for, because we can't do that overnight. We can make promises, but that's what politicians do already. We need to be realistic, and we need to go into this with the understanding that this is going to be a battle, and you need to send a fighter, someone like me, to Congress to make sure it's seen to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this section of the forum. So what I'd like to do now is for us to start our closing statements. So Ms. Macbeth, you could please.
Thank you. Most certainly, I am not a politician. I didn't grow up wanting to become a politician, and I didn't lay out a plan, a career plan to become a politician. I am simply a mother, a daughter, a taxpayer, a human being, a woman who's lost her child to unnecessary gun violence. And what I do know, and the experiences that I've had over these last 20, 30 years, is that what people need is a sense of hope. What people need to know, what people want to know each and every day of their lives is that, am I going to be able to keep food on the table? Am I going to be able to pay my bills? Are my children going to be able to have a good education? Am I going to be able to have good health care? Am I going to be able to make sure that I can help provide for my parents while they're aging? Can I have the democracy that the United States says that I am afforded? And what I can promise you is that a lot of these issues and concerns that you have, this has been my reality. This has been my experience. So no, I don't come to you with numbers and figures and facts. I come to you with an open heart, wanting to serve you as your public service, having you hold me accountable to be an open voice for you, carrying your needs to Washington. I want to offer you hope. And that's what I will do for you in Washington each and every day. I will be accountable to you, my neighbor, and that's why I want to represent you in Washington. And I pray that you would find that I am acceptable to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Macbeth. Mr. Cable.
Thank you. We're 2 weeks out from, less than 2 weeks now, wow, from an election. I've been on the campaign trail 7 days a week, day and night, along with everybody else on this stage. One of the things I wanted to make sure that I did for my family is at least 4 or 5 nights a week is to put my children to bed. They're 2.5 years old. They're twins. And they each like to pick out different books every night. My daughter, Alice, always picks the same book, and it's called You're Here for a Reason. Now, on a certain page, it says, even the smallest of things that you do blossom and multiply far beyond you. And we're raising our kids in a household that knows that no act of kindness is too small, and that all of our actions have consequences. We've seen them in the last election. Last summer, when they were trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, my wife and I would stay up late every time they would have one of those midnight votes, and we'd hold our breath. Millions of Americans were calling their legislators, begging them not to strip their health coverage away. And when you're calling for your life, or your twins' lives, you can no longer sit in my position in a newsroom and simply report on this anymore. All of our actions have consequences. I'm throwing my hat in the ring here because I care deeply about this community and the future, not only for our children, but for all of our neighbors and for this country. We are at a crossroads right now, and we're going to have an opportunity to change the direction of this country. We've got to take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Capel. And Mr. Griffin, your closing statements.
I make it a point to read the news on a regular basis, and one of the things that always sticks out to me is the fact that there is one entity that is consistently less popular than this president. I know it's a surprise considering his approval ratings are consistently in the toilet, but Congress is that group that is less popular than the president. And it always begs a question. Why is that? Considering that we have the opportunity to elect our representatives every 2 years, it would seem that we would have the opportunity to get rid of these people that ostensibly, according to the polls, we so deeply despise. And I think going back to what I said earlier, we send a couple of groups in particular to Washington time and time again. We send the wealthy, we send career politicians, and we send celebrities. And we raise our hands and question, why do these groups consistently drive the country into the ground? And I'll tell you, it's because we don't vote them out of office. This district is special in that we have an opportunity right now to walk away from that, to choose a better path. And while I would say I am only one person, I will also say I will never lie to you. I won't make a promise that I can't keep. And I depart from the traditional political approach in that sense. I think that we need more authenticity in Washington. I think we need more accessibility in Washington. And if you feel as I do, and if you think as I do, I will point out again, you have a choice. And you have that choice up until May 22nd. So if you want a change, if you want things to go differently in this country, if you really want to be the change that you tell your friends and your family, you have that opportunity. But you need to exercise your vote on May 22nd. And I hope that you will join me in sending a message, not just to the Trump administration, but to the electoral powers that be and to the party powers that be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Griffin, and thank you to all three of you. Thank you for stepping up to run for office, and best of luck May 22nd. This next portion of our forum will have two candidates that need no introduction. They are the former leader of the House Minority Caucus and the former chairperson of the House Minority Caucus. We are fortunate as Democrats to lead the way in many areas within state and national and local government. One of those is basically by the platform that we stand by. It could be no more important than in this great state of Georgia when it comes to electing the next governor. The governor has a number of formal powers that are stipulated by the Georgia Constitution. The governor is the chief executive of the state and oversees the executive branch. The governor is the chief law officer of the land, and he or she, in this case, a she, will take care of that laws as faithfully executed and shall be the conservator of peace in the state. This power to enforce laws is almost identical to that of the President of the United States. The governor is the commander-in-chief in the state's military forces. The governor has the power to veto legislation. The governor is allowed to fill any vacancies in the Georgia House of Representatives and the Georgia Senate. The governor may give an annual statement of the state address to the General Assembly and is permitted to propose any policies or laws at his or her choice. The governor may call the General Assembly into special session if he or she deems necessary. And the governor is allowed to appoint officials in the event of a vacancy until the next election for any state political office. Ladies and gentlemen, these are but a few of the roles and responsibilities of the governor, and we as Democrats find it incumbent upon us to ensure that one of these women are elected as our next governor. With that said, we'd like to move into our opening statements. Our opening statements will be made from left to right. So we'll start off with opening statements with the Chairwoman Evans.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you, Chairman Owens, and thank you to the Cobb County Democratic Committee for this opportunity and for Cobb County government for providing these facilities tonight. It's an honor to be with you. I'm Stacey Evans, and I am working hard every day and night to be your next governor. And the truth is, I never was supposed to be here in this capacity. Where I started in life did not naturally lend itself to ending up here, but I'm so glad that it did. I was born and raised in Ringgold, Georgia, which is up in the northwest corner of the state, born to a single teenage mother who was only 17 years old when she had me. And today is her birthday. Can probably do the math and figure out how old she is, but I won't tell Mom, I promise. But growing up was difficult. My birth father didn't stick around. We moved a lot. We lived in about 16 different homes by the time I was 18. I remember many times coming home and finding that our lights had been turned out or that our water was not on, because sometimes we just couldn't pay those bills. And one time when I was about 12 years old, I remember very vividly getting ready for school, looking out the back window and seeing one of my stepfathers beating up my mother. And I picked up the phone that morning to call the police to ask for help. But the police on the other end of the line told me that they knew my stepfather, and their exact words to me were, "He wouldn't hurt a fly." So they didn't come and help us that day. And that moment taught me a lesson about how much it matters who's in power and what people can do with their power. Luckily, I saw another way as well. I had a high school government teacher that taught me the good that people can do with power. She invited then Governor Miller to come to my high school and tell us about this brand new program in Georgia called HOPE. And he explained HOPE. If you keep up a B average, you can go to any four-year public college for free. And regardless of your grades, no matter what your GPA, you can go to technical college tuition free. So that was the answer for me in changing my circumstances. I went to the University of Georgia, the first person in my family to go to college. I stayed there for law school. I met my husband, Andrew. We've been married coming up on 14 years. We have a beautiful, energetic, brilliant daughter, of course, named Ashley, who's recently 6. I wouldn't have my family if it wasn't for HOPE. I never would have been able to become an attorney and stand up and give a voice to the voiceless in their fight for justice. And I never would have been able to serve in the state legislature, the same body that some 20 years before I got there saw fit to invest in kids like me that would never have been able to access higher education without HOPE. Now I'm running for governor to bring that same hope and opportunity to all Georgia families. Not just hope for higher education access, but also hope that if you work hard, you'll be able to have a good, paying, dependable job. Hope that you'll be able to access health care when you need it. Hope that your kids will go to schools that live up to their promise and allow them to live out their dreams. And hope that we will be a state that is open for business and closed for hate. We have the opportunity to do these things, to bring real hope and opportunity and change to families across the state. And I look forward to earning your vote on May 22nd. Thank you.
Thank you. And Leader Abrams, please give us your opening statement, ma'am.
I want to begin by saying thank you to the Cobb County Democrats for hosting this event. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak about the future that I see for Georgia. It's a future where we know that there's a clear choice to make about the direction we take our state in. Whether we go back to an old Georgia, an old playbook, an old way of doing things, or if we go forward, looking towards the future, making certain that every Georgia family has the freedom and opportunity to thrive. And I'm running for governor because I am a proven leader and a clear choice for the new direction of Georgia. I grew up in a family that struggled. We struggled to stay above the poverty line, but we never struggled to know what's right. My parents made certain we were taught core values: faith, family, service, and responsibility. Those are the values I live by. And I'm proud of the fact that I have taken every day of my life to leave behind me the legacy of those values that my parents taught me. That's why I have fought to make tough decisions as a leader, as a business leader, as an executive in a nonprofit, and as a Democratic leader in the House of Representatives. I did that work to make Georgia better. From Abbeville to Zebulon, from Vinings to Jessup, I've traveled the state of Georgia, first as Democratic leader and then as a candidate for governor, because I want to know what Georgians need. And I'm proud to say that I have a track record that delivers. I know that families are raising children who are not their own, like my own parents are, raising my niece. And because of that, I fought to get $15 million more per year put into the state budget to help grandparents raising grandchildren and to expand their rights. And as a small business owner in the midst of the Great Recession, I worked with the Obama administration to help create or retain more than 2,000 jobs throughout the state of Georgia and help 350 small businesses stay alive and keep their lights on. I know that my record speaks for itself, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what I've done. I have refused to auction off our public schools to private interest. I have refused to stand down when the NRA tried to lift up their issues, and I voted against terrible bills that put our families in jeopardy. But I also fought for hope. When the Republicans were going to gut that program, I fought for our families and I won. 500,000 little 4-year-olds have continued to get to pre-K because of the work I've done, and 100% of African American students still have access to hope. But as the next governor of Georgia, I have bold and ambitious plans, detailed plans for what we do next, because we have to educate children from cradle to career. We have to build a thriving and diverse economy in all 159 counties. And we have to have a proven leader in the governor's office who does the work to expand Medicaid, to continue criminal justice reform, and most importantly, to protect our communities and lift them up. Because every Georgian deserves the freedom and the opportunity to thrive. And I look forward to talking about how we're going to get that done. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. In your opening statement, you mentioned about work that you've done during the recession. However, the recession ended several years ago, but in many parts of the state, including here in Cobb County, several factors such as household income and purchasing power have not rebounded. What policies would you support to help facilitate wage growth, job growth, and upward mobility for all Georgians?
We have to have a state where every family has the freedom and opportunity to thrive. And that's why I'm proud to have issued an economic mobility plan that looks at exactly that issue. It begins by instituting a workers' tax credit to put money into the pockets of families, especially those who are working hard to make ends meet. But it also includes a child care tax credit, a scholarship that helps that helps 0 to 3-year-olds go to high quality daycare. We're excited because that program would permit a family that makes $40,000 a year to have access to $200 to $5,700. But more than anything, it's about creating thousands of jobs throughout Georgia. I'm the only candidate who has started small businesses that have helped create additional businesses. And I want to take 5,000 small businesses throughout Georgia and help them create 10 jobs each. Those are 50,000 jobs that will lift up our community and will never leave our state.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. And the same question, Ms. Evans.
Thank you. The truth is, for some families, it doesn't matter whether the government or business predictors are calling it a recession or not. It doesn't feel ever like they're thriving. That's the kind of family that I grew up in, where we were always struggling. And it was very difficult. And there are families like that all across the state of Georgia. We have to raise wages in this state. We have the lowest minimum wage in the entire country, $5.15 an hour. I know we can do better than that. But it's not enough to strive for a higher minimum wage. We need to make sure that more opportunity is available. And that means, first and foremost, making sure the doors of higher education are open to all. And in 2011, the promise of hope was gutted. My opponent co-authored a bill that led to 97% of African American students losing access to full tuition Hope scholarships and led to 40,000 students leaving our technical colleges. That cut off access to opportunity for families to get the education, the job training, and the skills that they needed to get onto a good paying, dependable job and to build the careers that they deserve.
Thank you. And Leader Abrams, she did reference you in that, so you have 30 seconds to respond.
This is a false and misleading attack that is deeply disappointing because I've worked with Stacey Evans. I asked her to co-chair the Save Hope Committee. I worked with her to sponsor the only successful bill she has ever carried to restore hope. My name has been on every successful bill that she's put out there, and it was because I understood we had to do the right work to save pre-K, technical colleges, and access to hope for all students. That's why 100% of students still have access to hope. That's why African American students don't have to meet standards that are unreliable. But it's also why I'm extraordinarily proud that when the chips were down and we needed to stand up for all of our families, I was the only one standing up and doing the work.
Thank you. Next question.
Mr. Chairman, I think I was invoked in that
I
response
do
as
believe
well.
you were, so yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was there in 2011. It was my first session. I had come to the state capitol to expand opportunity. I was a product of the Hope Scholarship, never would have been able to go to college without it. Nobody had to tell me how important it was to fight for hope. I was ready to do it from day one, and that's why I did not go in on a deal that would cut hope. You don't expand hope by cutting it. And the truth is 97% of African American high school students lost access to full tuition Hope scholarships, and 40,000 students had to leave our technical colleges. I am sick and tired, just as I know you are, of people trying to take credit for things that good teachers do. And the truth is pre-K was saved because the teachers came to the Capitol and let their voices be heard. That's why we have full day pre-K.
Thank you. Chairman Evans, there's obviously a lot to talk about the Hope Scholarship. However, the fact is, not all children are covered, and for many of us that did not receive the Hope Scholarship, the cost of tuition continues to increase every year. What would you do as governor to support legislation that either sets tuition rates or limits tuition increases at public universities in Georgia? And if you would, why or why not?
Well, the most important thing that we can do is to make sure that we are making sure that there's access, and that means financial aid. It means restoring the promise of the Hope Scholarship, that if you make a B, you will have the money that you need to cover tuition at a public college, and that no matter what your grades are, you'll be able to access tuition-free technical college. But the truth is, we have to go a step further. We need needs-based aid in this state, real needs-based aid. Because if you can't afford to go to college, it doesn't really matter what the tuition is, whether it's discounted or not. And I am the only candidate in this race that has signed my name to legislation that would expand and open up needs-based aid in this state, because I know how important it is. I know what it's like to piece together a financial aid package. I had HOPE, I had Pell, which is a needs-based grant, and I worked, and I had loans. Students need our help. We need to always be doing what we can to make it easier and not harder, so that access and opportunity is deprived to no one.
Thank you. Leader Abrams, same question.
I think we have to continue to set the record straight, because unfortunately we can't get to good answers if we keep having false attacks and false information. Representative Evans absolutely did carry good legislation, and I give her full credit for helping to restore the technical college piece. But what she always leaves out of the rest of the story is that I asked her to carry that legislation along with Craig Gordon, that I actually negotiated with the governor to make certain that legislation would move forward, and that she thanked me for my, and I quote, amazing leadership in getting that done. That's the kind of leadership I will always carry, because being a leader is not about getting credit, it's about getting the work done. And the work I did on need-based aid for the last few years was to refuse to sign a single piece of legislation that did not guarantee that casino gaming revenues would be used to support need-based aid. Because if you don't get it in writing, it doesn't count. I believe that we have to have debt-free college for all, and I'm the only candidate who has a comprehensive plan for how we provide debt-free college, not only for those who have a B average, but for those C students and those Ds doing the best they can, but who also deserve access to education in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. Chairwoman Evans, I'm going to give you an opportunity to have a 30-second rebuttal, and then we're going to do our best to get away from this topic.
Well, Hope is so important, and it's become a big issue in this campaign, but the truth is it's always been a big issue to me, because it is why I'm sitting here today. Nobody had to ask me to carry that bill. I knew that Hope needed help, and I was there to do it. It's funny, in these elections, absolutely there are things that Leader Abrams did during our time in the legislature that I admired, and I did thank her for that. But I did not thank her for working with the governor to cut off my lifeline and the lifelines for tens of thousands of Georgians across the state who needed access to Hope. That simply did not happen. Facts are important, and I'm glad that we're getting to some of them today.
Thank you. According to figures from the Department of Economic Development, total film and television spending in Georgia hit a record $2.7 billion last year, which is about 1/3 over the prior year and a tenfold increase since 2008. This has been in large part due to Georgia's lucrative and controversial tax incentives in the industry. To fuel continued growth, do you support the trend of continuing to expand these tax credits, and what or other ways do you feel that we can continue to grow in the sectors of Georgia's economy? Leader Abrams.
I'm proud to have attended Spelman College and the University of Texas at Austin, and finally to have attended Yale Law School, where I became a tax attorney. And I brought those skills back to Georgia because I know Georgia has the capacity to grow and thrive. And when I served on the Ways and Means Committee in 2008, I served on a special subcommittee put together by the chairman to create that film credit. And I've been proud of the work it's done. But here's why it works. The film credit is not about paying for films to come to Georgia. It's about creating a pipeline of opportunity for people who are already here. And I believe that any tax incentive that we create has to actually pay for itself over time, which is what the film credit has done. But I've also been the strongest advocate for tax accountability legislation, so we know where our dollars are going, how they're being spent, and that every one of our communities, and not just the ones we favor, have access to opportunity. That's why I have put forward a comprehensive plan for economic mobility so that everyone in our state can benefit from these tax incentives. Whether you're a high school student who wants to go get training from IATSE and become someone who works in the film industry, or a worker who's down at Plant Vogel who wants to keep their job. I believe that we should invest in our workers, putting money back into the pockets of our families every single day.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. Chairwoman Evans, same question to you.
Thank you. The film tax credits that we've come up with here in the state of Georgia are one of the best things that we've done. We've grown an amazing industry that has led to the creation of lots of jobs. It's brought incredible economic opportunity and dollars to our tax digest, and we should do everything that we can to encourage the expansion of this program and the continued growth of the industry. But the truth is, there's a big threat looming over the success of this industry and all the other great industries that would follow coming to the great state of Georgia. And that is the time that the Republicans spend pandering to the far right of their primary base and promoting this so-called religious liberty legislation, which is simply a license to discriminate. It is hateful, it is wrong, it is a business killer, and it will cause the film industry to leave this state in a snap of a finger. And that's why this election is so important, for this and so many reasons, to make sure that we are protecting job opportunities, that we are protecting the growth of this economy. And for the film tax credits and others, we need to always make sure that we're getting the return on the investment. And that's why I want to set up a commission that will continuously study and making sure that we are getting the benefit of every bargain that we make on behalf of the citizens of Georgia.
Thank you. Recently, House Bill 930 was signed into law, which created the state-level Atlanta Regional Transit Link Authority. But as governor, you would be tasked with looking at the overall transportation needs of our state. What are some of the larger transportation and infrastructure needs that we need within Georgia, and what would you do about them? Chairwoman Evans.
Thank you. Georgians have to be able to get where they want to go, literally and figuratively. Government has to invest in the infrastructure to make it possible for upward mobility to exist in the state. That means investments in transportation infrastructure, but also healthcare infrastructure and continual investments in people. When it comes to transportation in particular, we've got to make sure that we are working to create a coordinated regional mass transit system for all of Metro. The county by county system does not work. And I don't know about y'all, but I am ready for transit to come to Cobb. And I have a feeling most of y'all in this room agree with me. And the parts of Cobb where we would put those trains agree with us. And we have got to move forward, and it will take state leadership to do it. But we also need to make sure that transit is not just an Atlanta metro thing. We need the whole state to understand that transit is for all of us, and that it will lead to economic development opportunities across the state. That's why I want to invest in commuter rail lines that connect the smaller cities to each other and to Atlanta, so that all Georgians will have access to transit. All Georgians will have access to opportunities to get to good paying jobs, regardless of what the particular circumstances in their region at that moment may be.
Thank you. And Leader Abrams, same question.
And this is a place where I think we are in absolute violent agreement. We have a responsibility in the state of Georgia to invest in transit, not just in Metro Atlanta, but across the entire state. And that's why in 2015, as the Democratic leader, I negotiated for the first time in Georgia's history, $75 million going into transit in the state of Georgia. I then used my leverage with the governor and with the Republican Party to help push a SPLOST plan that allows local governments to invest. That's critical because part of getting to transit is making certain that every community can do what it needs to do. But I agree that we have to do more than HB 930, because HB 930 doesn't come with investment. It doesn't include any dollars. And so we have to have a governor who's willing to make the right choices to pay for the responsibilities we have. Because it's more than just transit. It's about paratransit for those who are disabled. It's about connectivity for communities that are distant from jobs. But it's also about creating good jobs in those communities using transit as an economic driver. And I am committed to making certain that happens in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. To another issue that's been talked about quite a bit, which is gaming in Georgia. So Georgia gaming laws are relatively strict. as they prohibit wagering on horses, dogs, or any casinos of any type. In fact, the only type of gambling that's legal in the state of Georgia are raffles for charitable organizations. However, there are at least 2 cruise ships, one that's docked in Savannah and the other that is in Brunswick, that offer casino boats that sail 3 miles out into international waters where gambling is considered legal. That, along with the successful Georgia lottery system, seems to suggest that 1, there's an appetite for this, and number 2, there's a certain amount of capacity in forms of gaming for Georgia. So the question is, what type of gaming would you support, under what circumstances, and how would the revenue be dispersed? Leader Abrams.
This is an important topic because we have a crisis in Georgia. We have underfunded our educational system by $9.3 billion. And although Georgia has one of the most generous merit scholarships in the country at $700 million, including a B average scholarship as well as the Zell Miller, we know that we are not doing enough for need-based aid. We know that thousands of our children drop out of school every year because they lack the ability to close that gap. And that's why I have fought for the last few years to make certain that no casino gaming bill passes the Georgia legislature without including need-based aid in the constitutional amendment. It's not enough to put it in the law. Now, I grew up on the Gulf of Mexico, and I know what gaming can do. And I know about those boats because they now pull right up to the coast. But I will say this, I personally am not a huge fan of gaming, but we've already opened that Pandora's box with the lottery. So what I would say is we give the citizens the right to vote, but we make certain that any investment in gaming goes to pay for need-based aid and truly universal pre-K in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. Chairman Evans, the same question to you, ma'am.
Thank you. We've got a little agreement here too. I support bringing casinos to this state as long as we earmark funds for places where we need to close gaps in the state. And one of the biggest is in needs-based aid for college. That's why I was proud to co-sponsor legislation to allow casino gambling in Georgia if we dedicated revenues to needs-based aid. And I was proud to do that. That is a step in the right direction. You hear a lot about some of the problems that may come from casino gambling. And of course, with any new industry, we're going to have to engage in setting up a regulatory framework to make sure that we are protected and that the ills do not overcome the good that we can do from this industry. But folks of goodwill that are deliberate and determined, I know can come up with the right framework to do this. And I can't help but remember that when we were discussing whether to allow a lottery in Georgia, there were a lot of folks that popped up and talked about all the great ills that would befall our state if we did so. And the lottery has been a very successful program. And until 2011, hope was an amazing promise for Georgia students. And I am sure that we can work it out so that we get the best of both worlds here.
Thank you. Students that have dropped out of high school are 3 times as likely to be incarcerated than their other school-age peers. What can the state do, and particularly you as governor, to reduce the flow of students into the prison or school to prison pipeline? Chairwoman Evans.
Thank you. Criminal justice reform is one of those areas where we have to give Governor Deal some credit. He has made us a leader in criminal justice reform, but we've got to continue to do more because there is more work to do. And I think most families probably have a personal experience with the criminal justice system, and mine is no different. I had a brother that struggled for years with drug addiction, and during his time of addiction, he was in and out of prison probably 30 times. And I'm very proud of him today. He's clean and sober, but for a while he struggled. And we've got to make sure that we're treating drug addicts like folks who need treatment and access to help and not as prisoners. We need to make sure that we end private probation and private prisons. There should never be a profit motive to lock up our citizens. We need to end the cash bail bond system for low-level offenses. And if you are behind bars, we need to make sure that you get access to GED training, to job training, to technical education, so that when you leave prison, if it's not a life sentence, then it's not a life sentence, and you're able to get onto a good paying job. And that's also why we have to ban the box. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader Abrams, same question.
In 2011, I was proud to co-sponsor the criminal justice reform legislation that has led to incredible and remarkable changes in the way we do business in the state of Georgia when it comes to criminal justice. But we have to protect that progress, and we have to ensure that the next governor is committed to moving things forward. I'm the only candidate up here who's put out a bold and detailed plan for criminal justice reform, a comprehensive plan that comes from my personal experience. A brother who has served time twice in state prisons because he lacked access to the mental health supports he needed to take care of himself when he got out of jail. But I also believe that we have to raise the age at which a child can be charged as an adult. And we have to decriminalize being poor in the state of Georgia. It should not be a crime to commit a traffic offense, and you should not go on probation because you burned leaves in your front yard. We have to expand access to transitional programs because we have to believe that people who get out of prison deserve reentry. And that begins in elementary school and in K through 12. And unfortunately, we have kindergartners who can be suspended, and that puts them on the path to the school to prison pipeline. That is why I fought so hard to preserve the pre-K program in the state of Georgia, which Governor Nathan Deal gave me credit for and said that he wouldn't have expanded it and restored it to full power had it not been for my efforts.
Thank you. Last question. As Georgia's influence continues to grow nationally and globally, it is incumbent upon the next governor to ensure that the citizens and businesses remain safe. With potential targets such as our Fortune 500s, the world's busiest airport, and a massive port in Savannah, what is your plan to safeguard our citizens and assets both in the physical and cyberspace? Chairwoman Evans.
The job of governor, first and foremost, is to keep us safe. And that means safe from physical harm and also safe from cyber attacks. And on day one of my administration, I want to do a top-down audit to make sure that our systems are safe from outside attacks from those that would want to do us harm. And we have incredible resources here within the state of Georgia to do this. We have the Cybersecurity Center in Augusta, Georgia. We have Georgia Tech right down the road here in Metro Atlanta. We need to take advantage of these resources and make sure that we are always including experts at the table when we are determining how we're going to keep our systems safe. This also comes to be relevant in our voting systems. We need to have absolute confidence that when we go to vote, our vote is being cast and counted, and also counted for who we cast it for. That's why I support bringing a verifiable paper trail to Georgia's voting machines. That's why I think that we should have automatic voter registration so that we can pay for this paper trail and to keep our system safe and up to date.
Thank you. Leader Abrams, same question.
I think in addition to leveraging the great work that's being done by Fort Gordon in cybersecurity, we have to use this as an opportunity to train our young people for new jobs and new opportunities. That's why I'm so proud of the work that I've done on public education. I have fought to defend public education against our friends and our enemies, and I'm the only candidate who has never voted to auction off our public schools, because we can use those schools to provide training and opportunities for our young people, and we can use our small business investment to help young people and entrepreneurs invest in cybersecurity. I also believe that we have to look forward to the other challenges facing our communities. Atlanta was recently under a ransomware attack. The challenge we have is that throughout the state, a lot of our smaller communities can't possibly afford to pay that ransom. And so the state of Georgia, under the leadership of the governor, has to have a statewide audit, but also work with GMA, the Georgia Municipal Association, and the Association of County Commissioners of Georgia to do an assessment of local government capacity to respond to those attacks and to make certain they are all hardened their infrastructure to support cybersecurity throughout the state of Georgia.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. At this point in time, we'll go into our closing statements.
I was actually invoked in that last response.
Go ahead.
I have my 30 seconds. Thank you. My opponent has continuously misrepresented my record on public education. I am a product of Georgia's public schools all the way from kindergarten until I got my law degree at the University of Georgia. I understand that public education is paramount to upward mobility. I have never voted for vouchers. I have never voted to privatize our schools, and statements to the contrary are simply not true. Facts are important, y'all. I am a staunch supporter of our public schools, and I want to invest in a community school model so that all of our students can do their very best in the classroom.
Thank you. Leader Abrams, 30 seconds.
When I talk about auctioning off our public schools, I'm talking about the Opportunity School District, which included specific language that would have allowed private interest to take over our public schools, including closing them down and auctioning off the buildings. That is what I'm talking about. Because you can't just read the top and the headline, you've got to read the fine print. And as the minority leader, I did my best to guide my caucus and make certain they had all the facts. Unfortunately, in this election, we've had misleading attacks where the facts didn't follow, or we cherry-picked the facts and the statistics that we like. I've made it my mission to make hard decisions after methodical careful consideration. And I'm proud of the record that I have and the fact that I've been endorsed by the Georgia Association of Educators for my strong, staunch public advocacy for public education.
Thank you, Leader Abrams. At this point in time, we have to go into closing statements. So, Leader Abrams, for you, please, 1 minute for a closing statement.
Absolutely. Again, I want to say thank you to the Cobb County Democrats and to everyone watching. Elections are about choices, and I am the very clear choice in this race because I know that our state needs more than just hope. We need a proven leader who brings to the table the experience to create the jobs we need, to educate bold and ambitious children from cradle to career, a leader who has helped small businesses grow and thrive throughout the state, and a leader who is committed to the expansion of Medicaid, to criminal justice reform, to investment in advanced energy, and to making certain that our communities are protected and safe. That's the job that I want because I know that if we work together, we can transform the state of Georgia. Diversity is our strength, and it should never be used as a weapon. And that's why I'm proud to have been endorsed by a range of organizations who protect the LGBTQ community, Planned Parenthood, and most recently, the 2.5 million domestic workers in the country have come to Georgia to endorse me. I've stood with Mahente and our Latino communities and with our Asian American communities, and I will always stand with diversity in the state of Georgia, and I will always move to make certain that every Georgian has the freedom and opportunity to thrive.
Thank you. And Chairwoman Evans, your closing statement, please.
Thank you. Thanks again, everyone, for being here and all those who've tuned in to watch us at home. I'm running to bring hope and opportunity to Georgia families. Hope that the doors to higher education will be closed to no one because we will restore the original promise of hope. A B will get you tuition at a public college or university, and technical college will be open to everyone and it will be tuition free. But also hope that if you work a full-time job, you will not have to struggle in poverty because we're going to raise wages in this state and stop being the last in minimum wage across the state of this country. That we all will be able to have access to good paying jobs no matter where we live. That if you want to start or grow a small business, you can do so. That our kids will have the education that they deserve. That we will cover more Georgians with insurance, starting with expanding Medicaid. And that we will keep our state one that is open for business and closed for hate. But it's not just enough to fight against the bad. We've got to be proactive. And that's why I'm proud to be the only candidate in this race that introduced comprehensive civil rights protections to make sure that all of us were protected against discrimination in public accommodations and employment. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Your commitment to public service to our state is something that we're all grateful for, and we look forward to being able to call one of you Madam Governor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That brings us to the close of this evening's forum. I'd like to remind you that early voting has started. Please go out and vote May 22nd. Thank you for your time, and thank you to the Cobb County government for allowing us to have use of this facility. My name is Michael Owens. I'm the chairman of the Cobb County Democratic Committee, and on behalf of all Democrats in Cobb County and the Cobb County Democratic Party, I'd like to thank you for tuning in this evening.